And welcome everybody to another episode of Glove Up or Shut Up, right here on AngryMarks.com. My name is Peter H., and I'm joined by my co-host once again from Omaha, Nebraska, Stevie J.
I've heard one phrase more times today than I can even possibly begin to name to you, Peter. Do you know what that phrase is?
I have no idea.
I'm going to shock the world.
Is a Shockmaster in a Bellator press conference, or?
No, it's just Paul Daly's promise that May 19th we're going to see something we didn't expect. But I wouldn't say that because I've seen enough Paul Daly fights that I know what to expect.
Explosiveness.
Indeed. They don't call him Semtex because he plays with Play-Doh. He plays with plastique.
Yes, and his opponent, Rory McDonald, we'll start off with the Bellator conference call that you reported on today for MMA Mania. The Daly McDonald fight is the main draw, but, did you ever think you'd see Daly McDonald in a Bellator cage?
Well, it wouldn't have happened in UFC because Daly's probably not ever going back there. So, to answer your question, yes.
Well, you interviewed both fighters. How did they sound on the press conference today?
Very confident and relaxed. McDonald blew off the fact that he'd been out of action for 11 months and said, that just means that I'm even better and you're going to see me return to my old ways and I'm going to be the best Rory McDonald that has ever fought anybody and I'm going to go out there and prove my point by knocking out Paul Daly. And Daly, for his part, just seems incredibly cool, calm, and composed, saying that it's a return to his roots. He won the Cage Rage title at Wembley Arena, which is now called the SSE Arena, and he said, I'm just coming home. My family lives there. My granny lives there. My auntie lives there. Family has a chip shop down the street. I'm just going to go there and shock the world. He kept saying that. He just kept saying he was going to shock the world.
Now, when it comes to Rory, did he address his nose?
Oh, yes. In fact, he was asked so many times about it that I didn't have anything left to ask him about it when it came my turn. He pretty much said, yeah, it got broken twice, but I'm bred to be a fighter. I'm not bred to be a fashion model, and I don't care about my nose. And, of course, somebody else asked him, well, have you tested it in training? And he said, yeah, the reason it didn't get better the last time is I didn't take a month off to heal between fights like I should have, so I didn't do any sparring for a little while, and then when I got back in the gym, it was just fine.
Now, how many other fighters were on the call, or was it just Daly and McDonald?
Just Daly McDonald and Scott Coker.
Oh, did Scott Coker have a few words to say?
Well, he was asked if they're trying to sign either Chuck Liddell or Matt Hughes, and he didn't say yes. He said, we're concentrating on the fights on May 19th. So he didn't say no exactly either, but I don't think he was trying to imply anything. I think he was just trying to redirect the line of questioning.
Yeah, one of the news items in my list was about Scott Coker's comments because, up here in Canada, we're in the midst of the Stanley Cup playoffs, and if you missed Game 6 between the Capitals and the Penguins, Sidney Crosby looked like he suffered another concussion, but the concussion spotters didn't spot it, and they didn't have the authority to take him out of the game. It reminded me of Chuck Liddell in the sense that, they told him, you're done fighting, you can't take another shot to the head. So, if Scott Coker brings Chuck Liddell back to the cage, A, is it a good idea? And B, who the hell do you match him up against?
A, no, it's not a good idea. So B, you don't match him up with anybody.
I understand the Matt Hughes one as well. Matt Hughes makes somewhat sense. He didn't get, completely demolished in his last fight, or to the point where the doctors say you should never fight again. That one would be more interesting because, there's no seniors division in Bellator, but Hughes could probably take on a few good names in that division.
Hughes at least has a stylistic advantage, I would call it, because he's such a great wrestler, and I'm sure that hasn't diminished that much even in retirement. In fact, knowing him, he probably still works out as hard and stays in as good a shape as he ever did, especially if he's full-time farming, because that's a very physical, laborious job. So, I would not put it past him to be able to go out there and wrestle somebody to the ground for 3 rounds. But the question is, does he still have that competitive drive? And if he does, would he want to compete at the highest levels again? Because if you bring a guy like Matt Hughes into Bellator, you can't put him in there with Johnny Come Scrub. You got to put him in there with somebody at the top of his weight class, because the name Matt Hughes pretty much demands competition.
He reminds me of, there's a Bellator comparison, and I'm just blanking on the name right now. He was a coach on the Fight Master show.
Are you talking Joe Warren?
Yes, Joe Warren, thank you.
Yeah, the wrestling, the pedigree, pretty similar, I would say. You're onto something there.
I was just, it's a shame Warren and Hughes couldn't lock it up, and
yeah, the weight class difference would be insurmountable. They could not do that.
But I mean, you see a lot of Warren and Hughes, you see a lot of Hughes and Warren, so it'd be interesting, but it would never happen. But
but it's like that mythical pound for pound list. If everybody weighed the same,
this again.
Yeah, but that's the whole idea of the list, is that if everybody was the same weight, who would be the best? And that would be the kind of fight you would want to see, is Matt Hughes versus Joe Warren. Who's the better wrestler?
God.
Kind of reminds me of those old stories of Brock Lesnar and Kurt Angle having shoot fights backstage in WWE just to see who the better wrestler was.
Or in a dream world, would Stone Cold beat Goldberg in their prime? Shut up.
Well, that doesn't have anything to do with real sports, unless they were both playing football, in which case maybe.
All right, well, let's talk more news here. And Anderson Silva.
Here we go again with Anderson Silva.
We have to talk about it. Apparently, he's saying now he will not be fighting at UFC 212.
Yeah, he quote-unquote removed himself from consideration for the show, unquote.
Now, he put a very interesting message on Instagram, and I wrote down a couple of lines here, and make of it what you will. But he said, to say yes when you want to say no is to give more value to others than to ourselves. It is not to put your value in the right place. It is to impose no limits, and that is not to respect yourself. What?
That's pretty typical Anderson Silva cryptic doublespeak.
I don't know. I mean, Dana White even came out and said, if he's thinking about retiring, maybe he shouldn't be fighting at all.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm paraphrasing, but that basically was the gist of what Dana White was saying. And he said that before with fighters. If fighters are talking about retirement, their heart's not in it anymore.
And I hate to say it, but there is some validity to that argument, because usually when a guy starts to talk about retiring and he has another fight and he loses that fight really badly, you kind of feel like maybe he should have retired before the fight instead of after.
Rumble.
Yeah,
cold or something.
Well, I think Rumble still went out there with the belief that if I win, I can take this thing further, and if I lose, I'm done. He may have been talking about it beforehand, but who knows how serious he was going to be about it. But then again, if he already had a job lined up in the NFL, maybe he never had his heart in it at all. So it's just really hard to judge in that particular case.
Now, let's move on to another Dana White comment this week. He says that the proposed date for the Conor McGregor Money Mayweather fight has been lost thanks to the Canelo versus Triple G matchup.
I told you so.
Stevie needs a moment, everybody.
I told you so. I'm sorry, but I told you this fight was never going to happen.
Well, the Canelo Triple G mega fight.
You might as well explain for the non-boxing fans that you're talking about Gennady Golovkin,
who is amazing. I don't know what else I can say. Boxing's not my forte, but
so is the beating that Canelo gave Chavez. That was
I saw that.
One-sided.
I saw Klitschko fight one week and Canelo fight the next week, so my boxing card is pretty much.
This is honestly, and even though we haven't really given it due diligence on Glove Up or Shut Up, this has honestly been one of the biggest months for boxing in a really long time.
Yeah. And, with this fight in September, it could be the third big fight of the year as far as big events and, pay-per-view draws as for
Oh yeah,
boxing.
they're easily predicting over 1 million buys. They said the Canelo fight already did that, so Canelo and Golovkin will easily do that.
And for those who don't think Canelo, doesn't hit hard, you're not a boxing fan. Like, I wouldn't want to take one of his punches. You couldn't pay me enough to do that.
No, he's left a trail of bodies in his wake. In fact, the only person that Canelo hasn't beat is Money Mayweather.
Well, Mayweather,
That's really no shame in that. It's like when you look at a list of people that Rory didn't beat and Robbie Lawler is on the list twice and Carlos Condit is on the list. It's like, you know what? There's no shame in not beating either of those guys. It's kind of the same thing.
Well, let's transition to Money Mayweather's proposed opponent, Conor McGregor, as his girlfriend did give birth to his son on Sunday, Conor Jack McGregor Jr.
Yes, our congratulations to Conor and his growing family. It's very good news.
So that was pretty cool to see some positive news in Conor's life, and now we can focus on whatever Conor does now, because now with this proposed fight date being pushed back, I mean, what do you do?
Well, it's about time he gets around to defending that lightweight title, so that's what you do.
Now, let's talk about another fighter who is going to have some time on his hands, Kelvin Gastelum.
Oh,
His
yes.
win against Vitor Belfort has been overturned, and he's been suspended for 3 months for marijuana metabolites.
I believe the Brazilian commission also said something to the effect that he is, quote, the worst kind of liar, unquote.
Which Kelvin responded with, he's done fighting in Brazil.
Yeah, he didn't take it very kindly that they called him a liar.
No. And when we were talking about maybe it was marijuana edibles, we weren't far off if it's metabolites, so.
Well, you can get metabolites just from smoking. It'll stay in your system for a while.
Oh, yeah. Now,
let's not even talk about what might be in Sean Waltman's system now.
No, we're not going there. That's for AMP. I am not commenting on that.
Yeah, we actually forgot to talk about it last week. Whoops. So, yeah, we may still have to talk about it this week.
Speaking of Belfort, he is actually training at TriStar for his fight at UFC 212.
That came up on the conference call.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, in fact, some people were saying...
TriStar last time I checked.
Yeah, and people were basically implying that Rory was not getting the attention he deserved because of Belfort and all the other megastars being there, and Rory was like, you know what? I love the fact that TriStar keeps bringing in killers. The more killers we have, the more fun we have, the better we get.
Hell of a lineup, though, that's for sure.
Yeah, and then, of course, somebody asked him about all the time he was spending in Kelowna, and he's like, you know what, that's where I got my roots, so there's nothing wrong with me going back and getting back to my roots and working with David Lee and getting into the Rory that I used to be, so I can split my time between TriStar and there, no problem.
Alright, so we've got a couple of fights to announce here. Let's see. The one we talked about last week, Brett Johns and Mitch Gagnon, the most polite call-out in the history of Twitter, is now official, July 16th, UFC Fight Night 113.
That's good. They both wanted the fight, so let's have the fight. I agree.
And two other fights here. June 17th, Jonathan Meunier versus Li Jingliang. I screwed that up.
No, that's close enough, actually.
Alright, UFC Fight Night 111, Singapore on June 17th.
Mm-hmm.
And Jimmy Rivera against Thomas Almeida, UFC Fox 25 in Long Island, New York on July 22nd.
I am really looking forward to that fight.
That one, if you're a casual fan, I would circle that one on your calendar because that one could be the fight of the night.
Yeah, Almeida is something special.
And for those who don't know, there's a show this weekend. Finally, Stevie, we're back to having a show this week.
Huzzah! It's time for one of the quote-unquote, I'm using that phrase a lot tonight, most stacked UFC cards this year. It's UFC 211, Miocic versus Dos Santos, Part 2.
Now, what happened in that first fight again?
Okay, well, why don't you tell the people, because I was just pulling up the odds while you were introducing the fight, because I figured you'd want to break down the fight odds.
Well, I'm sure the odds are great. Actually, you know what we should do before you bring up the odds? I mean, yes, Miocic and Dos Santos is the main event of the show, There was also another title fight with Joanna Champion against Jessica Andrade. But, I mean, you said this is stacked, and at first I thought you meant stacked like the UFC show from years ago. But looking at the Fight Pass card, I'll start there. Jessica Aguilar and Courtney Casey looks interesting at strawweight. Gabriel Benitez and Enrique Bazzola looks pretty good too. And, as far as Fight Pass, there are some decent fights here.
Yeah.
And I don't say that often when it comes to Fight Pass fights.
Honestly, it's quite a lot of talent. I mean, like you already said, the names that are competing on Fight Pass are all respectable fighters. The one I would say is the one to pay attention to the most is Aguilar and Casey, but any of these fights could be a potential barn burner. In fact, Jared Gordon basically won the right to fight on this show, so you know he's got to be a prospect because of that fact.
Yeah, and Equinos is no slouch either, so that should be really good. But let's talk more in depth about the prelim card on FX to start here.
Oh, well, you did say you wanted me to talk about the Miocic Dos Santos previous time they met, so
okay, yeah,
I was going to get into that. And
okay.
Now that I've got the odds pulled up and put aside, let me just go ahead and tell you that they first met on December 13th, 2014. They headlined a UFC on Fox card, and in what was considered to be the fight of the night. This was probably the fight you could argue that people who doubted Stipe Miocic coming into this, they stopped having their doubts after this.
Yeah, the reason I wanted you to bring this up was because some even consider this his coming out party.
Right. So he may not have been the victor, but he definitely made a name for himself with that performance.
And now they're coming back, but this time the title's on the line, so definitely another 5-round fight. I'm having trouble, I hate saying this, I'm having trouble picking the challenger in this one. I'm gonna lean towards Miocic in this one again.
I've not been wrong so far about his title defenses, so I'm not inclined to, but the fact that Dos Santos holds a win over him already is making these a very close line if you're trying to pick a winner here, because minus 130 right now just marginally favors the champion, but Dos Santos is right in there at plus 110.
Well, he's the hell of a striker, and one of those shots at the right spot, down goes Miocic.
Yeah, we've seen him do it to Cain Velasquez. There's no reason he can't do it to Stipe, but there's no reason Stipe can't do it to him. That guy hits like a ton of bricks.
He's got a tough jaw, too.
Oh, yeah.
Now, Joanna Champion and Jessica Andrade, what are the odds?
Pretty close. Andrade is plus 135. Miocic minus 155.
See, usually I'd say these would change at the weigh-ins, but no, that sounds pretty accurate to me, actually.
Yeah, and it seems pretty much in line with where both of those fighters are at right now, because Miocic always has really tough, really competitive fights where she pulls it out later in the rounds, and Andrade is just on a tear right now. 3 straight wins, a TKO, a guillotine, and a surprisingly competitive fight with Angela Hill, Overkill Angela Hill, that ended up being the fight of the night. So you got to give her respect for all 3 of those fights, that she has earned her way up to this title shot.
Now, what about Damian Maia and Jorge Masvidal?
Well, there's a whole lot on the line for both of these fighters here, because Masvidal, who is currently the favorite at a narrow minus 130, would love to leapfrog his way up to the top of the ranks at welterweight and put himself into contention. Damian Maia has been saying he is the number 1 contender for a while and isn't being treated like it, but if he doesn't go out there and beat the bricks off Masvidal, then who's going to be clamoring for him to get a title shot? So there's big stakes and a small, narrow margin of opportunity based on the line. So this could be a really, really close fight.
If I had to pick a winner, I'm going to say Masvidal.
I can understand why you would say that, because, he is on a 3-fight win streak, but one of those wins was kind of fluky. The win against Donald Cerrone, that was a quality win. I'm not going to take that one away from him.
Was that the fight that Cerrone says that put him on timeout?
I think that might have been the one that put him on timeout. And if it was, it should have been, because he was taking too many fights too fast together. So he probably needed to slow down a little bit. But
Yeah.
with all that said, and like I said, I give Masvidal a quality win over Donald Cerrone. I also acknowledge that Cerrone was taking too many fights and might have been ripe for the picking. And Maya's win streak is considerably longer and arguably much higher quality, starting with Yakovlev and then progressively getting tougher with each fight. Ryan LaFleur, Neil Magny, Gunnar Nelson, Matt Brown, and then he choked out Carlos Condit in the first round. So, again, maybe people in the UFC do not see Maya as the next number one contender, but looking at that list and 6 straight wins in a row, if he beats Masvidal and makes it 7, it's pretty hard to argue he's not.
Frankie Edgar and Yair Rodriguez.
And once again, we got a really close line here. Minus 130 for Edgar and plus 110 for Rodriguez.
See, I've gone against Edgar before and I've been burned.
Yeah, I don't really recommend going against Frankie Edgar. Especially not with the current, the only loss that he has, and that was a 5-round decision, was to Jose Aldo. But in the rest of that run over his last 6 fights, he beat BJ Penn, Cub Swanson, Uriah Faber, Money Mendez, who he just blitzed and knocked the hell out, and Little Heathen Jeremy Stevens. So, you gotta say, other than losing to Aldo, and he had to go the distance before that happened, Edgar has just been on fire.
It's true.
But Yair Rodriguez is a pretty special fighter. He's the winner of Ultimate Fighter Latin America. He's got an amazing spinning arsenal of moves. He is like the Michael Venom Page of UFC featherweights. He'll just blind you with his quickness and dazzle you with his unorthodox striking, and then you're laying there looking up at the lights wondering what the hell happened. So, I will not pick Edgar to lose, but I will not be surprised if Yair just overwhelms him and gets in a spinning back fist and knocks him the hell out. I could see it happening. I don't predict it, but I could see it.
This is a fight that I'm really struggling with for a winner. Sergio Pettis and Henry Cejudo.
You know what? The theme of this show, for this UFC 211 show, is super close, super competitive fights that's really damn hard to take a pick in. But this one shouldn't be one of those fights, Peter, because Cejudo is minus 440.
Whoa. That's too high.
You say it's too high, but I think he takes Sergio Pettis down over and over again. So I don't disagree with the line here.
You don't think he catches a takedown defense and slaps on a choke?
Maybe, but I honestly believe that Cejudo is the next best person in the division other than Demetrius. So,
whoa, that's a bold prediction.
Yeah, at some point, Cejudo and Demetrius are probably going to meet again.
Maybe. I don't know. I think Sergio Pettis, they're not giving enough credit here.
Maybe so, but I'm looking at the rest of these lines, and we got a lot more really close lines, and that one wasn't one of them. But we got Poirier and Alvarez with minus 130 to plus 110. What do you think about that, Peter?
I got Poirier.
I don't know. As much as I like Poirier, I feel like Eddie Alvarez is going to be looking to make a statement after what happened to him with Conor McGregor. I think this could be a huge comeback fight for him, and that line is awful close, which makes me think he's got a chance.
Well, this is going to be a very exciting card. I don't think there's going to be any hockey on Saturday night because the Game 7s, there are 2 Game 7s on Wednesday and be a quick turnaround to have Game 1 of the series start on Saturday. So for those hockey fans that are looking for their fix, this should be the card to go watch. Or it should be the show to watch.
And let me run through some of these other lines really quick. You give me a heads up if you want to comment on them. Okay. We got Jason Knight plus 105, Chaz Skelly minus 125 at featherweight. In the middleweight division, we've got Krzysztof Jotko minus 145, Dave Branch plus 125.
Why does that name sound familiar, Dave Branch?
David Branch.
That sounds familiar.
David Branch, formerly World Series of Fighting light
Ah,
heavyweight
yes.
and middleweight champion.
Yes, that's why I know him from World Series. Okay. Joko. Oof, that's a good test for him. I'm
And
going
then
to say Branch wins that fight.
I am too. I even though he's currently the underdog, I think he wins. We've also
Okay.
got one of the other few really long lines of this card. Texecutioner James Vick minus 420 against Polo Reyes at plus 335.
Oh, that will not go to the judges.
You wouldn't think so. The aforementioned Casey Aguilar fight is minus 130 to plus 110 respectively. So Casey is actually a small favorite here. I don't know if I agree with that, but that's what it says.
If Aguilar loses that fight, is she done?
I don't know if she's done, but it might not help her career, I will say that. The Gordon fight, and I talked about how he won his way into this show. He earned the right to fight on this show. He's minus 145 against Quinones, so he's not a heavy favorite, but he is a favorite. And Chase Sherman minus 145, Rashad Coulter plus 125, Barzola plus 165, Benitez minus 190, Christensen plus 325, oh man, it's not very often I hit a name that I have trouble with, but let me take a shot at this. Gajimirid Antigulov is minus 400.
Minus 400, I'll take that.
Yeah, and I don't even know anything about him, but at minus 400, you know what I'm thinking? He must be from Dagestan.
All right, so that's the show this week. Stevie, Thursday night AMP, you talked about Sean Waltman. Is there any other big stories you're talking about this week?
The European Tour will be a subject. The upcoming New Japan Super Juniors Cup, we'll get some more details on that. More lineups have been released for the upcoming events. The Dominion card is starting to take shape, and so is the Backlash card, which is coming up May 21st. So plenty
and
of things.
You got injuries to talk about with Emma and Braun Strowman.
That's true. Elbow injury for one. Potential shoulder injury for Emma. I'm not quite sure, but she was sent home early from the tour, so That's still developing. And of course, we also have an injury to Ember Moon of NXT fame. So, yeah, the injury bug has bit WWE pretty hard right now, but that happens pretty much in the world of MMA every couple of weeks, so we're used to that.
Now, is there any update with Shibata or Akebono?
Shibata is doing better, but was still experiencing some partial numbness. He was able to stand up on his own, so that was a good sign. I believe they were doing another surgery to replace part of his brain that they had to drill into to relieve the pressure, part of the skull. And I don't know if he's had that surgery yet, so I'll get an update from my co-hosts on Thursday since they follow the New Japan scene pretty closely, and if Shibata had his surgery, they'll know about it, but if not, then it's just hopeful that he's making a slow and steady recovery. Meanwhile, Akebono's family denied that he was put in a medically induced coma, but Dave Meltzer confirmed it, so those two sides are kind of at loggerheads right now over what's really happening, so we're not getting the full disclosure here.
No. And, Akebono, I mean, if you followed anything about Japan over the years, that's a name you would recognize right away. So, if you're a wrestling fan, or at least mixed martial arts as well. So, he's a name in Japan everyone would recognize. So, for him to be, if he's not in a medically induced coma, that's a big way to put into a coma.
To quote the opening of Mike and Adam's Big Audio Nightmare, he's definitely big in Japan.